Had lunch outside of here, actually. So I had a graduate student who was from Toronto. Is that how you say Toronto, not Toronto? Toronto. And he told me about this mythic food called poutine. I don't even know how to pronounce it right, and there's a lot of echo back and forth. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Right. So, and by the gracious invitation of one of the persons here in this conference, we went out, walked around Parliament Hill, and took some pictures, and it took me to this something like poutine place, and really absolutely delectable French fries and on top of that there is Korean barbecue. So I had a Korean and Canadian experience, and I looked at the menu. I made a mistake of looking at the menu kind of thing. It was 1,450 calories. So I didn't have breakfast. I had lunch. I doubt I'll have dinner. So thanks again for coming back to this afternoon. For those of you who weren't here last night, my day job or my job is I teach at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, and the connection between Ottawa and Nashville is Mike Fisher, so the Ottawa Senator, Nashville Preds guy. And so I see my role as an academic missionary, and I'll get to share a little bit more fully about that. So I think the title of this talk is From Atheist to Christian at Yale. So I'd like to talk about in 4 different segments about my life journey and how God has kind of gotten a hold of me and taking me to a place that I never ever imagined would be where I am standing in front of you today. If I had it my own way, I doubt I would have left South Korea. If I had it my own way, I would have become someone definitely other than a professor in a secular university in the history, religious studies, and divinity school. But anyway, so 4 segments. 1, so they're mnemonic devices, I suppose. They all start with I. Incarceration, immigration, identification, and inquiry. Incarceration. So my major life events happened in 6-year intervals, age 9, age 15, age 21. At age 9, when I was in grade 3, I was a happy-go-lucky boy, and I came home one night and one afternoon, and my mom said, your dad won't be home tonight. And so I said, okay, and he was entrepreneur, but also I knew that he has some political connections, and he was doing things that I wasn't always aware of. Next day, he didn't come home. The following day, he didn't come home. And my mom told us that our dad was in prison, and he was incarcerated under some trumped up charges, and that we don't know when he was coming home. So I was never nurtured in a Christian home, as far as I could tell, that I didn't really have any religion. I think a lot of Westerners assume that if you're from Korea or Asia, particularly Korea, you must be either Confucian or Buddhist. There are, preponderant number of people like that, but then there are also people who are non-religious, and I think ours was one of them. Occasionally we would have, church attendance and things of that, so they're more like a calendrical piety rather than anything that was meaningful and substantial. So think about when you were 9, and I saw that there was one young lady who was 9 years old, and so I was that young lady's age when my father was thrown into prison. And one thing that happened to me, and because nobody ever really told me about God. No one really kind of explicitly taught me about justice per se. We were learning civics and ethics and such. But I remember this very distinct moment saying to God, if you're around, please send my dad home. And I don't know, it was some kind of extemporaneous prayer or something like that. No one really taught me anything about prayer, and that was kind of pleading or plea bargaining, and then that went on for a while, and then at the end of the particular segment in my life, I was basically, figuratively speaking, shaking my fist at God and saying, you can't be real. You cannot possibly exist because you threw my dad into prison and threw away the key. So to make a long story short, my father was released from prison 3 years later. So I was in grade 6. And the next 3 years are pretty much infernal, very hellish. So the Korean government made it very difficult for us to live in Korea. So although we didn't have the sort of asylum status, but we ended up in the United States. And I left Korea thinking that, okay, this is a country, though it's my putative motherland, but it has done nothing less than just nearly destroy my life. So I was quite excited about coming to America at age 15. So incarceration and immigration. So coming to America, I had lots of expectations of the good life that will be awaiting me when I came to the States. And as a story would, as fate would have it, or providence would have it, we ended up, at least for the first 7 days of our stay in America, in Los Angeles. My uncle had lived out in Southern California, and he took us to Disneyland and Magic Mountain, is that what it's called? And then was SeaWorld and things like that. Queen Elizabeth, that big kind of ship. And so everything about my first 7 days of stay was wonderful. And that seemed to be a place where you didn't have to speak English much. And then we ended up in Philadelphia, where my mom's older sister had lived. And my uncle had determined that I actually would be better off. I was a ninth grader, grade 9, that I would be better off going to an ESL program. But this particular ESL program was actually held in the same place as a local elementary school. And in grade 9, I was exactly this height. And I was 15, and I was deeply mortified about just going to school at an elementary school. Right? I mean, because it was just a period of trying to figure out who the heck I was, right? I mean, I was you're beginning to discover your own kind of sexuality. You discover girls and guys, but you discover a lot of things about yourself and desires, misdirected, rightly kind of born, and so on and so forth. And so my high school years were absolutely miserable. It was terrible. And we were in there weren't that many Koreans, but my parents decided to go to church because so often, as you perhaps know, some immigrants, when they come, they may not have been religious before, but they find the sort of local ethnic enclave. And then oftentimes religious organizations, whether mosques or temples or churches, play that role of kind of helping you to be much more integrated. So my parents have started to go to church. I knew nothing about the church. I thought I'll give it a go. So Friday nights I would have these kind of meetings, Friday night Bible studies, and the youth pastor basically called it triple BBB, right? So we had a Bible study, and then we'll go to Burger King, and then we'll go bowling. And so and it's wonderful if done rightly, but I tend to be a very outgoing guy, but then something happened to my personality when I came to America. Like I was really happy-go-lucky guy, I was athletic, and I was, if I can just, people liked me, I liked them. I never really felt like skeptical about my own ability to relate with people or befriend others. But coming to America, basically it just was traumatic experience. But what was really interesting, or more traumatic yet, was by going to church, I felt the sense of alienation even more so. So the Bible study, okay, no one sits with you in a Bible study, that's okay. That's all right. I mean, it's not ideal. And some of you are in youth ministry, please listen up, because then we go to Burger King, and I don't know what it was. I mean, it was just so I thought like there are other Korean kids, so they would at least talk to me, but they're mostly second generation Korean Americans, so they didn't speak much Korean, and I wasn't wearing the right clothes. I certainly didn't speak the language. I didn't have the right haircut. I didn't play the right sport, whatever. So I wasn't part of the cool crowd. I was part of the loser crowd, right? So hardly anyone was sitting with me at Burger King. But the worst of all experience, and this is before Robert Putnam wrote this book called Bowling Alone, was to bowl alone. And one good thing was you have the whole alley. I mean, sometimes people will join you, but then a lot of times I'll find myself bowling alone. And I was always praying that it will be an even number of kids so that somebody will join me. But sometimes when we had odd number of kids, I'll be bowling by myself. And one thing I could never figure out, pardon my French, why the hell wouldn't a youth pastor actually come over and bowl with me occasionally? I'll find myself bowling alone a lot. Right? And this is what I'm getting at. You see, a lot of times we get so heady, and I'll tell you about my own life. I became a very heady person. I did all the right degrees and went to all the right schools, and I teach all the right places. But more often than not, people's problems with Christianity has something to do with the heady issues and intellectual hang-ups and so on. But more often than not, it's the stories of hurt. The stories of rejection, stories of people saying who are supposed to embody the gospel in a more compelling and endearing way. They end up doing the very opposite. So think about the sense of alienation and rejection you would feel if you go to a triple B thing, Bible study, Burger King, and bowling, and you are basically alone the whole time. So by the time I was accepted to Yale University, and we were driving up from Wilmington, Delaware to New Haven, Connecticut, and my mom had become sort of very excited as a Christian, so she read the entire book of Proverbs to me. She said, I want you to gain the Solomonic wisdom, and I hope you become and you're going to one of the nation's finest university. I hope you gain that sense of wisdom and from God. Was I listening? Absolutely not. I was so excited about two things. One, that I was getting the heck away from the church, that youth group experience really was absolutely the last thing I wanted from the church. And until I graduated, I really didn't have any friends. And there was one guy that I kind of got to be friends with, because the one that I would, after, the bowling, and he and I would go and smoke cigarettes and have a couple of beers. That became my friend. I mean, that was the only friend I had. I mean, so think about the irony of what was happening, right? The place that you're supposed to find meaningful friendship in Jesus. I don't know about the culture of Canadian Christianity, but in American Christianity, if you're smoking and drinking after your youth group, you're not usually looked upon as a paragon of Christian virtue, are you? So that was me. I go to university, and I was so excited I was leaving, and then so excited that I was going to plunge headlong into this intellectual pursuit of the good life and this great education. So my mom read the entire book of Proverbs, and my dad, he's a kind of laconic man. He doesn't say much, and maybe the political prisoner experience had kind of made him a lot more reserved. He didn't say anything the whole drive, and he's ready to drop me off, and then he said to me, "Son, I just have a few words to say to you." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "You're at university, you're a man now." And he says, "You can do whatever you want. Please don't do drugs." Think about two very, very contrastive counsel. Mom is praying that I'll become like Solomon, or gain a heart of wisdom. My dad says, follow any kind of hedonistic desire you want, just don't do drugs, okay? Because he thought, like, you're coming of age. You're now coming to be in university, and I think in Korea much more so. When you go to university, you're supposed to take a lot more ownership of your life and a lot of things that you do, and this is what he thought was the best kind of advice he could offer me. So I guess whose counsel I took more seriously, mom or dad? I'm a lot closer to my mom, but at that point in my life, I took my fatherly counsel much more seriously. Furthermore, Yale as was and as is one of the best universities in the world, and they have some of the best professors. And one of the requirements for all Yalees is that you take some humanities classes. And so I was talking to some of my friends, and I played baseball when I was in college, and throughout high school. So one thing that helped my acclimation to life in America was playing baseball. So I played baseball in Korea, played baseball in high school, played baseball in college, and that really helped me to kind of create my sense of selfhood that was kind of in contradistinction to some of my other friends. So my church friends, they were cool, and they drove nice cars, and they spoke English, and they looked down on me, and I kind of looked down on them like, "Oh, but you don't really play sports." And but when I got to college, I was having a great time. And some of these professors were, people from who took their degrees from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cambridge, Oxford, whatever, right? And there was one particular New Testament professor who basically said, "You know what? The Bible is a wonderful book, but it's really not the kind of truth that you want to kind of hang your life on. And he would talk about the errors and manuscript issues. And what do I know? I was an 18-year-old guy who was just taking this religious studies class as a second semester freshman and bought that hook, line, and sinker. Why? Two things, I think, as I look back. One, there was an ostensible, real presence of authority. The professor was gray-haired, kind of old kind of guy with a tweed jacket and had a kind of right cadence of speech and had the right pedigree. And he was, after all, teaching at one of the major vaunted universities. And he was pontificating, saying that the Bible is a helpful cultural document, but if you really know the truth, that actually, that's not true. But furthermore, there was also the desire of the heart for me to want to walk away from anything that the Bible had to say. Two things about that. One, because of my experience with some of my youth group friends, or friends in scarecrows, or alleged friends, or people that I shared space with for every Friday night or Sunday. I didn't like them. They certainly didn't like me. If this is a Christianity, so I had my personal agenda to reject Christianity or walk away from it. And also, there was a thing called the lifestyle choices that I was pursuing that if I understood anything about Christianity, that I shouldn't be doing. I don't know about you, but at least for me at that time in my life, people were just, objects of conquest, right? Life was about conquest. I gotta go get a degree, so get something, get a job, get hammered, or get this, get that. So it's a pathway toward conquest. But somehow I understood as I was, going to church. So my mom said, you know what, you don't have to do whatever, but she always, remember this is a day, I was a freshman in 1986. This is the days without and before BlackBerry or Snapchat, or it was rotary phones. You remember those rotary phones? And so I would talk to my mom once a week. She never asked me like how I was doing in school. She would ask me, did you go to church? And for whatever reason, because my mom had a very difficult kind of marriage, and there was a lot of issues of domestic, whatever. And so I loathed my dad, loved my mom. And I hated Christianity. Yet, because my mom would ask me, did you go to church? I decided, hungover that I was, Sunday morning, and I'm not exaggerating, like severely hungover, I would go to the dining hall, grab some food, and hop on the shuttle bus. They would take me to a Korean church in New Haven. There are a couple of reasons that I went. One, because of my mom. Two, that's the only place you could get Korean food. So I would go there. I remember this one story. I don't know how odd this thing was, but so I go to this church, and the college pastor was preaching, and I don't know what possessed him to do it, but he was doing some degree in Old Testament at Yale, but he was preaching from, guess what book in the Old Testament? Song of Songs. Do you know anything about Song of Songs? He was offering the sort of Bernardine kind of allegorical interpretation, but I made a terrible mistake of actually reading the text. I was like, holy crap, this is the Bible? And imagine if your first entree point to sacred scripture is a woman's breast. I was like, this is a great book. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the Holy Bible. I turned over, it says Holy Bible, and I went back to the Song of Songs, like, what about this book is holy? I don't understand. So in college, I was genuinely a confused guy. Hedonistic to the core, careerist to the core, and I just was really, and I was excited about being there. I was excited about being a baseball player. I was excited about studying all of these things. So I became an econ major, did well, loved life. And life was going just steadily on course until something happened. My sister decided to get engaged to a guy who was in seminary. And I was like, what the, what? I mean, nothing could be odder to me than that. Why would you ever want to marry somebody who's going into Christian ministry? Mind you, I was going to church every Sunday, and not every 2 Sundays, 3. It wasn't like an every Sunday thing, but on average, I would go at least twice a month to get Korean food, and because of my loving mother who would always ask me, did you go to church? And I don't know what it is, but I could not lie to my mom. I mean, all I had to do was, if I had a kind of, heart that was seared as with hot iron, I could have just said, yeah, I went to church. No, I couldn't do that to her. It was just that mom on the other line was asking me, did you go to church? So to satisfy her, I would say, yeah. And I did go to church, and I remember so many times I'd be falling asleep and I'll wake up, and I would always, so when I think about when I was in ministry for a little while, I think back on those days, and I did preach a few sermons on the Song of Songs to see what kind of response I would get from the audience, but so Yale was a very exciting time period. My sister was getting engaged, and one of the things that my mom asked me to do, and if my dad had asked me, if my sister had asked me, I wouldn't have done it, but my mom said, you know what? Could you go to this retreat that your brother-in-law to be is going to be speaking at? I said, what is that? I don't want to go to retreat, and because it's a Christmas break, I was going to have a great time with some of my friends, not my church friends, but my other friends, and mom said, this is going to be held in the Poconos, and I think he, along with other people, are organizing this college retreat. I think you would, and she said, you don't have to go because of Jesus. She said, but do it for me and for the family. Your sister is about to marry a pastor, and how bad it'll look for our family if none of your sister's siblings actually believed in Jesus. So it had very little to do with saving faith as in F-A-I-T-H, but it had everything to do with saving face of the family, F-A-C-E. So I went to the retreat regretting, what am I doing here? And everything about the retreat was terrible. The food was bad, the kind of people that were there, I'm like, I don't want to hang out with. But then I was feigning to be interested because my brother-in-law was always asking me, is everything okay? I said, yeah, right. Secretly, I didn't like him. And I was like, why is my sister marrying this loser guy? And he said he was a medical doctor, but he decided God called him to ministry. And I talked to him, I was like, why would you do that? He's like, God called me. And I remember telling him with this one-word answer, so? He said, God called me, and I said, so? And he looked at me, and he's still married to my sister, and he's a great, great guy. And last evening of the retreat, and I was so ready to go home. I was like, yeah, this is it. Everything, and because I remember I did my duty, right? Just I had to show up to the retreat. Mom said, you don't have to do anything, just go stay for the whole time. Kind of minimal requirement, right? So I'm going there, and then the last night of the retreat, and I'm not making this up, the whole thing sucked. And the praise team was up here, and they weren't like these two bands that were up here last night and today, really great. They were kind of a group of college, pastors and seminarians, mostly from the seminary that I ended up going to later on. But anyway, they were playing this song, and I never heard the song before. I had heard of Augustine because of, Western Civ, but I didn't really know about Augustine's conversion narrative. So this is what happened. They're singing this song. I later on found out it was written by and was Keith Green. And I later on found out it's from 1 Samuel. It's a song that some of the older people here probably remember or recognize the song, to obey is better than sacrifice. I don't need your money, I want your life. Bam! You know what happened? I'm sitting in the back row. Nothing was good about this retreat. Nothing about the musical aesthetics was pleasing to me. I never heard this song before. And guess what happened? I began to sob. Something about that song, to obey is better than sacrifice, I don't need your money, I want your life, just spoke into my soul. And I just began bawling. Because a week before the retreat, I told my sister something that hurt her, but it was sincere coming from me. I said, I don't know what you're doing marrying this loser guy, but it's your life. You're going to med school, and you're going to be married to this poor pastor. I'm an econ major at Yale. I'll make a lot of money after I'm done. I'm going to give you a lot of money to help your ministry. Right? So that was just a week before. And imagine, try to put yourself in that situation. You're not introduced to Christianity properly, and you hear this song that was terrible, but the words are such that to obey is better than sacrifice. I don't need your money, I want your life. And guess what? I had heard it as if it was God. Remember, it was, I don't need your money, I want your life. I didn't hear it as if the praise team member was speaking to me. I heard it as if it was God speaking to me and says, I don't need your money, I want your life. And from age 9 until that moment, I never cried. I never cried. Because my dad, if he hadn't taught me a lot, he did teach me, real men don't cry. So I said, oh yes sir, I will not cry. But at that moment in my life, all the defenses that I'd built up just broke down. And I couldn't tell you, so that's why I couldn't tell you what happened. It wasn't so theologically I'm a Calvinist, but it wasn't by reading John Calvin. It wasn't by reading anything of that sort of apologetic literature. It was by listening to a song that I hadn't heard before. And I still remember that experience was what really kind of turned me on to the gospel. Among other things one could say, it was that experience that really basically converted me, if you want to use the language of conversion. It wasn't, so it might have been a cumulative, no, I think it was definitively that song and those words that I heard as God was addressing me. And then as I was crying, and I actually began to like cry, like I began to cry, and I don't, and then my brother-in-law came over, like rushed over, like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And I just like hugged him and said, I'm really, really sorry. I'm really sorry because I hated you, and I'm sorry that and and I feel bad, like if my brother-in-law said to me, I would like punch him in the face, or what'd you say? But he's like, it's okay, man, it's okay. And I told him, I think it's God speaking to me. And I didn't have the right language, and I was done, and then I remember that night, at the end of the night, I cried so much, my eyes were like all sore, I'm like, I was a mess. And I'm going to sleep that night, and two kind of prominent emotions were one of joy and the other of confusion. So if some of you are looking into Christianity, some of you who had, my experience of conversion was joy and confusion. I was like excited that I think God is, because all my life since age 9 was trying to get to the next stage, because the end will be better than where I am now. That's what I was told, right? And that's how I was running through and jumping through all these hoops. And basically what I came to understand was God was saying, you belong to me, and I guess it's maybe conjecture, but I began to think that it's okay. There's a sense of joy and security. It's almost as if God was saying, I got you. You don't have to try anymore. But then I was confused because the question was, now what? Like, now what? Because if my friends, and I'll share, if I told, my worry was, okay, I'm going to go back to university in a week, and we're going to talk about our winter exploits, and the highlight of my winter, the highlight of my life thus far was becoming a Christian. And rather than getting excited, I was deeply worried. So I took the train from Wilmington, Delaware to New Haven, Connecticut, got off the train, took the cab, and went back to my dorm room. And just to give you a sense of what my dorm room was like, we had 7 guys living together, and we had what is called a kegerator. You know what a kegerator is? A refrigerator with a beer tap attached, and you have a keg in the refrigerator all the time. Just a kind of very slim snapshot of what my life was. Well, among other things, we love beer, and so that's what we were. And we're always playing cards or backgammon, and we all came back and that night, and we got some pizza and hanging out drinking beer, and then we're all talking about what happened during the winter break. And there are 7 of us, but there are several other guys joined in, so there were about 12 of us or so, maybe 13. And we're all going around talking about, yeah, I did this, I did that, and I got whatever, and talking about what happened during the winter break. Came time for me, and I was kind of just going circling. I was trying to figure out, okay, Lord, and I was actually praying, Lord, what should I say? I was excited. I wanted to tell my friends about what happened, but I was worried that they wouldn't believe me. I was worried that no, you can't be a Christian. Because to be honest with you, when I went to church, I didn't tell my friends, because I would go to get Korean food, or because my mom was asking, they didn't really ask, where'd you go? I would often say, I went to study in the library, something like that. But now I have to really face the truth. And okay, so guys are, getting slightly inebriated, but they're all having a great time. And it came time for me, so they, my last name being Lim, they always call me Lim. It's like, Lim, what'd you do? I said, I had a pretty good break, and then I said something, and then I said, and another thing is, I became a Christian. And it's almost like, the record is playing, and the geek, right, stops, the music stops, and it's like, what'd you say? And one of my friends, Mark, turned to me and said, what did you say? I said, what I said was, I became a Christian. And they all kind of stared at me. And then one guy said to me, yeah, but Lim, you do everything kind of extreme anyway, so it'll be a just passing phase. And I remember saying, yeah, maybe, but I think it's kind of different. And they didn't want to hear it, and which is understandable response. I mean, because we're all having a good time, and you don't want to have some Christian like, yeah, I became a Christian. And like, well, how are you going to respond to it? Let's all bow our heads and pray. I mean, it's not going to be the likely response. So they're like, okay, whatever, just don't. And one guy said to me, just make sure do everything in moderation. Don't go like overboard. The irony is that every one of my friends go overboard every Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. I was like, what do you mean don't go overboard? I mean, that's what you and I do. That's our MO. But religion, don't go overboard now, please. Second semester junior year was my loneliest time. People will be partying it up because I had to call it cold turkey because my lifestyle was like, this is not compatible with. I'm not against people drinking as Christian, not at all, but like the way that I was imbibing was definitely not the way that would honor God. And the kind of thoughts and behaviors and beliefs that I would have while drinking after, that's not good. And I began to read the Bible, and this is just because it never happened before, it never happened since. That one semester, I read the Bible. My brother-in-law gave me this NIV student Bible. I devoured that thing. I read that Bible cover to cover 7 times in one semester. You know why? Because I was so lonely. I was like, I want to know this God. I want to know about this God. I just want to know. And so I read the Bible, and okay, I read the Song of Songs, but then as I read through the Old Testament, weirder stories are popping up, talking donkey, and I was like, how do we understand this? And go through the Gospel of, Matthew, and then like the resurrection story was believable, but then, and I think in the Matthew's version where like dead people walk around, and my question was like, what happened to them? Did they stay alive or did they experience a second death? I don't know, but a lot of questions arose for me. So 7 times reading the Bible answered a lot of, it's just kind of a seeping into my being. Because if you read any book 7 times, you're going to start to kind of believe, and I'm not saying there's some kind of, whatever induced kind of a mass hysteria or anything like that, but I began to believe in the person behind the Bible. I said, okay, you must be real. But I had a lot of questions. So what did I do? I was about to finish with my econ major, so I did philosophy as my second major, philosophy of religion in particular. And one of the courses that I took then that really rocked my world was a course called Divine Sovereignty and Human Self-Assertion as part of religious studies. And I think one of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, being kind of, in some ways, kind of lonely as an evangelical scholar teaching at a secular university, is because there weren't that many Christian professors who are what I would call out Christians, who say, okay, I'm a Christian, you can ask me questions. I think there were Christian professors at Yale, as there are many other universities like the University of Ottawa and other places, but they may not feel comfortable coming out of the closet or whatever. And I remember taking that class and reading this one book. I know his name was mentioned earlier this morning, Søren Kierkegaard. He wrote this book called Fear and Trembling. It's the story of the Akedah, right? It's the story of Abraham being called to sacrifice his one and only son Isaac. And again, that book by Søren Kierkegaard just rocked my world. I was like, whoa, and I wrote my senior thesis on that book. And I recently, after some class of 90, I found that paper, that was about 40-page paper, and I was like, oh, and it was one of my files. And I was like, because remember that's done before, like floppy disks and all that, it was hard. So I found the hard copy, and I was like, wow, that's what I used to think about the Lord. And I was like, I can't believe I got this good a grade. It was not that great, but nevertheless. So I think loving God with my mind was one of the new MOs that I began to have. So I began, because God answered a lot of questions in my heart, that I began to understand a little bit better about theodicy, although why my dad was incarcerated and why our family had to suffer that shame and derision and move from 2-story home to my mom's friend's basement with no bathroom, I still didn't quite understand all the theological issues. But what began to emerge from me was the answer in the person of Jesus Christ. And I think the more I think about God in Christ, the more I get shivers, because I always when I think about the immensity of our universe and cosmos, I think of those songs by Pink Floyd, Is There Anybody Out There? Is there anybody out there? And that's a haunting question that could leave you even more vulnerable and lonely, because in that immensity of our universe, is there anybody there? So for me to answer that particular question has to be, for me, grounded in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And then I began to have some comfort. But by the time I was done with my university career, I knew that Jesus was my Lord and my God. And I knew that my life was turned around, lonely though I was, confused though I was. So if somebody were to say, if you become a Christian, your loneliness will go away and you'll have clarity. For some it's true, I think. Me, that wasn't true. I was even lonelier because the guys that I used to hang around with and girls I used to hang around, they basically, because we weren't doing the same thing. I wasn't doing the same, and so left the university, went down to New York City, took a job, and did corporate finance. And I was starting to wax and wane in my Christian commitment, and my sister had gotten in contact with one of her friends who was serving at this Korean Presbyterian church in Flushing, and she signed me up as a youth group teacher. She said, knowing you go to the city of New York, your old habits will come out, you're gonna party, you're gonna go clubbing, you're gonna drink, you're gonna do this and that, and you're gonna walk away from Jesus. I know you. So I never had that opportunity. I just never, so I got and you know one thing that happened was in this particular church, there are a lot of kids about 15, 16, I came to America when I was 15, 16. They were often in trouble with the law. I still remember this one guy. I mean, I don't know why he did it. I think he told me later on that he did it to impress girls. He actually brought a gun to church. He was part of this kind of Chinatown gang. And he's like, hey, Mr. Ren, come here. And he goes, hey, Paul, come here. I want to show you something. I said, what is that? And he goes, hey, and then he goes, it's a gun. I remember being so shocked. I was like, what are you doing? And it's being involved with, because they somehow like me. I was not dating anybody. I had a pretty good income. So a lot of these guys would come out and we'll go to like Smith & Wollensky or some like nice steakhouses. And I think they kind of took advantage of me, but it's okay. But I was kind of, so I hung out with these guys. But then I realized, and this is what the youth pastor said, he's a very conservative Presbyterian man. And he said, you know what, Mr. Lim, I know you have good income. But I also know that you went to Yale and studied philosophy of religion. So I don't really trust you. So don't teach them the Bible. Just play with them. So I was a guy who has some money and who has some athletic ability. He goes, I don't really trust your theology. So I want you to just go play with them, buy them lunch and dinner. But that will be a role that is really needed in our church right now. I said, okay, I'll be that guy. So one thing that had happened was, while I studied philosophy of religion, but that didn't really answer a lot of the Bible questions that I had. Though I read the Bible 7 times or 8 or 9 times since, I still had a lot of questions. And I was about to go to law school, but I remember telling my parents, because I had this desire, and I remember talking to my brother-in-law, and that was a real shock to everybody. Because when I told my brother-in-law that I actually was thinking about going to seminary to study the Bible just for a little bit, and afterward I'll go to law school, my brother-in-law was really shocked. He's like, what, you want to study? I said, yeah, just for a little bit. I mean, I'm not, and I remember telling him, I'm not going to be a pastor like you, but better than that. But I just want to go study the Bible a little bit. And so I did. I went to seminary to study the Bible, and I really was fully intent on going to law school afterward and go be a corporate lawyer, because as an immigrant family, my parents said, you got to make a lot of money and, be comfortable and, live in Long Island and, have a Beamer and have a couple of kids and a couple of dogs and a cat, and your life is great. You made it in America. And I remember my dad saying to me, and he's kind of extreme guy, he's like, those like blood promise? He's like, swear with your blood that you're going to go to law school. I was like, what? I'm not going to do that. like, are you serious about that? Because he goes, I know you do everything in extreme. I said, well, look who's speaking here. You want me to, and he says, it doesn't hurt that much, just do it. I said, okay. So I signed with I said, I'm going to go to law school. And my dad's like, okay, you better do that. I'll go to seminary. God got a hold of me. More questions about the Bible arose and theology, but it wasn't a question, again, they were not defeater kind of questions. I was like, I want to know more. And next thing I knew, my professors at seminary, at biblical seminary, they were saying, we think that you really have this sort of intellectual curiosity and the right accoutrements that we think you should go study and get your PhD and come back and teach with us. And I never thought about that. And I remember telling my dad, and he was like, yeah, when I heard that you're going to seminary, I knew that you're lost forever. Because as far as he was concerned, I was a lost cause. He thought I was doing everything in extreme. For him, Christianity is opiate of the masses. My mom's a devoted Christian, my dad is not. And so to fast forward a little bit, because I have not a lot of time as opposed to last night when I had plenty of time. So the experience of, that seminary, so incarceration, immigration, and identification, that there is somebody who would identify with me. And then I went to not law school, but grad school. And when I was finishing up, I was at Cambridge in 2001. I thought we were going to go to India, and the Lord closed that door, and the door was opened up at a school that he heard of and had a lot of respect for Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in Boston. So I began my kind of journey there, and that is the sort of an inquiry. For me, I think I have a lot of questions about the Christian faith. But it's not the sort of questions that will be like, yeah, I don't believe this anymore. I come to realize, at least at Vanderbilt where I teach, a lot of students were basically, a lot of them come from the South, and they have questions about the Bible or Jesus or Christianity, and oftentimes youth pastor will say things like, don't ask those questions. They're ultimately unhelpful or something to that effect. And I felt like, I was thankfully surrounded by people who didn't say, don't ask those questions. They're like, okay, let's think about it together. And one of the persons was my brother-in-law, who's an Old Testament professor, and in Korea now, and this is before he and my sister left to go to South Africa for his PhD at Stellenbosch. And he said, you know what, Paul, I know you have a lot of questions, and they're great. And he said, my prayer for you is that you will be surrounded by people who will not say your questions are stupid. And guess what? I became a professor. I can ask all kinds of questions, and I get paid pretty good amount of money to raise these questions about the Christian faith. And students will say, Dr. Lim, I also had the same question. I said, that's right. Let's think about that together. And I often say, you know what? My journey as an academic, my courses are never meant as a faith buster courses. So I teach about history of Christianity and teach about, currently I'm teaching a course on human rights and human trafficking and remaking of a global Christianity. And courses like that, they're not meant as a faith buster course, nor as a faith builder course necessarily. I as a historian want to see this phenomenon since late Middle Ages to about early Enlightenment period critically and do the best you can. And I always say, look, I'm a Christian. That means all that I do and all that I am is as this kind of mode of fides quaerens intellectum, faith-seeking understanding. I believe that God is. I believe that God exists. And we're trying to figure out the ways of God in history. And so I think for me in my life journey, it's been great. It's just the types of inquiry that I have, and I still have a lot of questions. I think I'm sort of, I'm really grateful to the Lord that I found my calling accidentally, right? Because so my wife and I and our son lived with freshmen for 7 years at Vanderbilt. We started this kind of residential college system. And so all these 18-year-old kids come to Vanderbilt and saying, I want to do this and I want to be that. And I often say, chillax. You don't have to have everything figured out. Like, why? Because I told them, look, it wasn't until I was like 25 that I kind of figured out this may be what I want to do with my life. And so often I think we're living with so much pressure to make something in the world or be counted for something bigger than yourself. And for Christians, I think the pressure is even greater for those of you who are Christians, because you feel like I'm serving this mighty Lord and I want to make a difference in the world, in the kingdom of God. But I think as a Reformed person, as a Calvinist, you know what I come to realize is that it's really not up to you. God's got it covered, and I regard it as a pure privilege to be playing for the team. What's the best NHL team right now? Ottawa? Okay, Ottawa Senators. How many of you played hockey before? I play hockey. Okay. Would you regard it as a real privilege if the Ottawa Senators said, can you be a starting defenseman? Oh, come on. What's that? Okay, Toronto, what, Maple Leafs, is that right? Okay. If Toronto Maple Leafs called you and can you be our starting defenseman, would you not be excited? Absolutely. And you know what? The way that I see it is, what I do, how I see my identity is, God is the celestial, the best coach ever of hockey or whatever sport you like. And God has called me, would you like to play for my team? I know I don't have what it takes to be on that team. I don't. Yet God has called me, and you're not only going to be on the team, you're going to be starting. You're going to be starting, and I will never criticize you, I'll never make fun of you, I'll never ridicule you, but you got it, brother. And no consequences going to be asked. You do your best, I got you covered. You know what? To me, that is the joy of being a follower of Jesus, being discovered by God. Coming to realize, you don't have to jump through so many more hoops to be more acceptable to me or to be more righteous. No. I think, and for me, I'm studying a lot, and that's been my life's goal as an academic and all that, right? I mean, win a book prize and major fellowships. All of those things don't mean jack squat. Because in the end, it is this awesome knowledge of knowing Jesus. Let me finish this illustration. So I was invited to give a talk at London University, and I was doing some research. My field of expertise is 17th century England. So I was doing some archival work at the British Library. And if you ever go to London, stop by the British Library. And you don't have to go in, but you just go in, walk up the steps, and you will see this huge glass tower of stacks. If you're like 5 stories high of stacks of old manuscripts and medieval books and so on. It's like this tall and this thick, and there's a tower of them. And I just stood there, and I'm thinking like, wow. I had written a couple of books and edited, one, and all that. Like when looking at this thing, and I was just like completely pygmied by the immensity of human knowledge and acquisition. Localized only in this small library, the British Library, but think about my own arrogance of thinking that I knew what I was talking about. You see, God is much grander than that, much deeper than that, and yet He calls you, you belong to me, and I want to hang out with you. In that journey of fellowship and discipleship, may you find true joy that can only come from this God of love and truth and mercy. Let's pray together, if that's okay. Lord, I want to thank you. I want to thank you that you are the God of our stories, that you are the God of history. Lord, I want to encourage my brothers and sisters who are gathered here who have been found by you. But I also want to pray especially for those who are outside looking in, through their stories of hurt, through their stories of betrayal or rejection or loneliness within the church, that they may have felt like, I don't want to be a part of this. Or maybe they have a lot of questions about Christian men and women behaving badly, or the questions of evil in the world, starting within our own hearts. God, I pray that you will help all of us to find the truth in you, because you will be the kind of God who will say, go ahead, ask me more questions. Having those questions can never be defeaters for you to walk away from me. Help us to experience you more deeply and more really in our earthly sojourn. We thank you, God. In your name we prayed. Amen. Thank you very much.